Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to the joint hearing today of the Assembly Budget Subcommittee Number 2 on Education and Finance and the Committee on Higher Education. Today's committee is about closing California's certificate and degree attainment gap. And in sum, we talk about an issue today that's important both to our state's economy and to individuals trying to get a better life for themselves and their family, a college degree. We certainly know the importance of a college degree. Research shows over and over that an individual earning a bachelor's degree can earn about $1 million more over their lifetime than an individual with a high school degree. We also know the societal impact as well. California faces a shortage, as we're going to discuss today. By 2025, we need about 1 million more individuals with college degrees. And for those achieving some type of certificate degree or a degree more than high school, we actually need 2 million degrees. It's a big issue, and it's a daunting task that we need all of our public education segments working on together, as well as our institutions of private higher education. The achievement gap in this metric is an important one we would like to address, and that's the nexus of today's discussion, and look forward to having a robust conversation talking about how these issues both intersect with the policy committee and with the budget hearings that we're launching this spring as well. So with that, let me ask our co-chair today, Assemblymember Medina, if he'd like to say a few words.
Thank you, Assemblymember McCarty. Today we'll hear updated data regarding California's degree attainment gap. We will also hear from our public higher education segments to better understand the role that they can play in meeting California's degree and credential needs. Our focus is on both the capacity of increasing enrollment and access, as well as the work being done to improve student success and graduation rates. I join Assemblymember McCarty in looking forward to lively discussion here today.
Mr. Chavez? Okay, thank you. Let's begin with our first panel. We're going to have the Public Policy Institute of California and California Competes join us to talk about the skills and degree gap issues. Hans Johnson and Lande Ajosi? Did I say that right? Ajosi, okay. Mr. Johnson with PIPIC, we're going to have you begin. Thank you.
Thank you very much for organizing this hearing on such an important topic. I am Hans Johnson.
Out to you. I'm going to refer to some of the figures in the chart as I provide my testimony in the report as I provide my testimony, so you might want to have that handy. First of all, just to kind of set the stage here, you already mentioned some of these facts. Educational attainment is the single most important determinant of economic well-being and success, and that's true for individuals, it's true for our state, it's true for countries. California's economic progress and well-being has improved over decades, strongly tied to, and in fact, largely because of improvements in educational attainment of our population. And as California's economy continues to change, becoming more technical and requiring more skills, a key question is whether the state's workforce and population and institutions will be ready, able to meet those future challenges. So to answer those questions, PPIC has developed projections of California's future with respect to the state's economy and with respect to the state's population and the number of college graduates that we will have in our future if current trends persist. And what we find, the short answer to the question is that we will run out of college graduates. We will fall about 1.1 million college graduates with at least a bachelor's degree, short of where economic demand will be by 2030. And in this work, we focus on workers with bachelor's degrees and the population with bachelor's degrees. Lande will be talking about other kinds of higher education training. If you look at figure 1 in the report, you see that equates to about 38% of all jobs in California depending on workers with at least a bachelor's degree, but only about 33% of workers in 2030 having a bachelor's degree. And already we see strong evidence of increasing demand for highly educated workers. If you look at figures 2 and 3, you'll see some basic labor market outcomes for workers in California. Unemployment rates for highly educated workers are far lower, only around 4% or so for those with a bachelor's degree, compared to less educated workers. And in figure 3, you'll see that the wage premium, that is the wage differences between someone with a college degree, a bachelor's degree in this case, compared to someone with another degree, a high school degree in this case, are not only very large, but very, very importantly here, and a key part of this discussion is they've been growing over time, and they've been growing fast. So that today those wage premiums for what a college graduate earns compared to a high school graduate are at all-time highs. So this is a tremendous indication of the demand for highly educated workers, which continues to grow in our state. So let me first of all unpack this a little bit and talk about the state's economy and our economic projections. Then I'll talk about the population projections, and then finally I'll quickly turn to some policy prescriptions. To assess the future economy of the state, we relied on occupational projections by the Employment Development Department. And our focus, of course, is looking at educational attainment, which the occupational projections do not have. So we attach educational attainment levels for specific occupations that are projected by EDD. And we did that based on looking at what was actually happening in those occupations historically. So if an occupation used to have not very many college-educated workers, but then it had a lot more, nursing is a very good example of that. People who have bachelor's degrees. The number and share of nurses that have bachelor's degrees has grown dramatically over time. And not only has it grown, the wage premium for those nurses with a bachelor's degree is substantial compared to nurses who don't have a bachelor's degree. So those two things together are an indication of real demand. We'll observe that historically. We project that into the future based on historic trends. And if you look at figure 4 in the report, you'll see the gold bars there show that for every major occupation grouping, except for a couple there at the very bottom, the gold bars are positive and fairly large. And those gold bars are the percentage increase in the share of workers that will have a bachelor or will need to have a bachelor's degree in those occupations. So at the end of the day, PPIC certainly isn't saying everybody has to go to college and earn a bachelor's degree. Our economic projections, as I already said, say about almost 40% of jobs will require a bachelor's degree. But we are seeing this transformation in our economy, and it's occurring not just with a shift in industries or a shift in occupations, but much more pronounced, a shift in the demands within occupational groupings. And that's what's been driving this demand for more highly educated workers. So that's on the demand side. Let's turn to the population and the supply side. And one of the biggest challenges, and if you look at figure 5, you'll see this, that we face is the retirement of the baby boom. And this is the first time in the history of California, it's also true for the nation, the first time in the history of the nation, in fact, the first time in the history of any nation in the world, where such a large and well-educated cohort will be exiting the labor force. 60 to 64-year-olds are the best educated Californians right now. And not only are they well educated, they're large in number because they're baby boomers. And as they exit the labor force, it will be a tremendous challenge for California to replace them with young adults who have high levels of educational attainment. We also did look at the role that migration might play in helping close the gap. And what we find is that even though we allow in our projections for an increase in migration of highly educated, mostly international migrants to California, it's not enough to make a dent, a very large dent in this gap. Okay, so where does that leave us? Well, at the end of the day, for all kinds of reasons, but certainly for economic reasons, California will need to develop more college graduates from our own population through our own school systems. And what we've done in our report is outline 4 key strategies that we think the state should consider in perhaps even developing a new state plan for higher education. Certainly a key part of all of these 4 components is increased coordination across institutions, and that includes K-12, private nonprofits, as well as the public higher education systems. So the first thing we think we need to do in California is increase access. I know there's a new eligibility study going on right now. Research shows that students, and access in particular to UC and CSU. So research shows that students, otherwise similar students academically, who start at a four-year college rather than a community college are much more likely to earn a bachelor's degree than if they had started at a community college. California has not changed the share of students that are eligible for UC and CSU in over 50 years. That's the top 1/8 are eligible for UC, the top 1/3 are eligible for CSU. And yet we live in a very different world and a very different economy that requires much more highly educated workers. Second, we need to improve completion rates and time to degree. As you know, about half of CSU students complete their degree within 6 years. Only around 1 out of every 5 completes their bachelor's degree within 4 years. So there's tremendous room for improvement, and there have been steps taken, and there have been some improvements occurring already. But in terms of thinking about the big picture here and where we have a lot of students who we could move forward to completion and graduation, that's one area where there's a tremendous amount of possibility. One possible approach, for example, would be to do more to incentivize students to take at least 15 units per semester so that they will actually graduate in 4 years. Right now, 12 units per semester is considered full-time, for example, but you won't graduate in 4 years with 12 units per semester. Third, the community colleges play a tremendously important role, and improving pathways from community colleges to four-year colleges and universities is essential. As I said, California ranks near the bottom among all states in the share of high school graduates that go to four-year colleges. We rank 47th among all 50 states. But we rank near the very top in terms of the share of our high school graduates that go to community colleges. So we need to do more to improve that transfer pathway. Certainly the associate degree for transfer is one step in the right direction. But even there, I would say it is it's not as universal as we would like. It depends on individual colleges, community colleges working with individual California State University systems, or campuses, and focusing on specific majors. And I think we need something that's more uniform for it to be more effective. Finally, we need to be obviously smart about how we spend money, and certainly that's true for our Cal Grant program. To its credit, California is fairly generous compared to most states in terms of their state grant programs. And also to our credit, we have restricted those grants to students who attend institutions that have pretty good track records in terms of getting students to graduate without too much debt so that they don't end up defaulting on their loans. So we think that the state should continue along those lines, but think also in other ways that we might use our Cal Grant monies to provide students with greater success. So for example, for many students, they get Cal Grants that pay for tuition and fees, but room and board is a very large and important cost of going to college. And for very low-income students, they often have to take out loans to be able to do that. And that could be a discouraging factor for them to attend, for example, a UC or CSU, something that we should actually want them to do. So in summary, the need is there. The demand is there. The number of students who want to go to four-year colleges and universities and to our community colleges is very, very high. We do surveys of Californians at PPIC. California parents, as you could guess, are more uniform in their attitudes about the importance of higher education than about almost any other function of government. And they right now still have pretty high confidence in our state institutions with respect to higher education, unlike other institutions of government. So there's a lot of goodwill out there that the state could use. I think that closing this gap is not insurmountable. It's not impossible. And that the actions that you and the higher education institutions take and others, K-12 parents and students, can actually help get us there. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Welcome other committee members that have joined us. We're going to hear from the second panelist, and then we'll open it up to questions and comments on this section. Ms. Josie?
Thank you. I first need to apologize for my voice, but I spent the last 3 days in Sacramento talking with many of your colleagues, and I guess this is what happens when you spend a lot of time talking with the legislature. I got a lot to say. So, first of all, thank you very much for having us. We're very excited to be here and to present some research and data that is, I think, a perfect complement to the work, the very fine work the PPIC has done. We too released a report, this time in December, that is focused on the degree achievement gap. And our report is not dissimilar from PPIC's insofar as we have used both some population data as well as data that we were able to obtain from the Department of Finance to really try and get an understanding of what is California facing. There's some distinctions. We are looking at an out year of 2025. And this report actually is an update to a report that we did in 2012. And what we found is, and if I have some slides, and if you go to, I guess, the second slide, the big news for our report is that we found that if you look out to 2025, that the state would be facing a gap of 2.4 million degrees. And those degrees both account for bachelor's degrees as well as sub-baccalaureate degrees. And by that we mean degrees that would require training of 9 months or more that result in some kind of terminal degree. So we didn't account for people who would be transferring to a four-year institution. So it's about 2.4 million degrees. We calculated our data a little bit differently. We came from, I guess, in some ways more of a normative perspective around what does the state need in terms of how many folks in this state need to have degrees and credentials, not only for the economic benefits that Hans spoke of, but also because of what it means in terms of the populace in this state, their ability to be civically engaged, that we think that you need kind of at least a floor of 55%. And the reason we chose 55% is because that would put us in the top 10 states then in the nation in terms of the proportion of our population with a post-secondary degree or credential. So that's how we got to that number. And you'll find on the third slide what we are projecting then out as the big gap. What we found is when we came up with our report in 2012, that we would be facing this gap of 2.3 million degrees, and we've only moved to 2.4 in 3 years, so it seems like maybe that's not such a big deal. Where the big deal comes in is actually what it takes to get there. So when we did our first report in 2012, we estimated that it would take about 4.5% increases year over year at our higher education institutions to close that gap. Having moved forward 3 years later, it would now take nearly 10% increases year over year to close that gap. So while the raw number doesn't kind of suggest any sense of urgency, the actual lift to get there is a much greater lift. And 10 years is not far away, particularly in the life of a higher education institution. So really trying to figure out what are the strategies that we can employ to close that gap is significant. I talk on the I guess third or fourth slide about our numbers and PBIC's numbers. I think what's important to know about these two numbers is that while they are distinct and they have different out years and different calculations in terms of how we get there, that the overall trend is the same. The overall trend is alarming in terms of the significant number of degrees that we are going to be short in this state if we aren't able to turn around and figure out how to produce more high-quality degrees and credentials. One of the things that we do in our report is, in addition to looking forward 10 years, we also take a look back. We decided that it would be really important to kind of get under the hood and understand some of the trends in degree attainment in this state. And one of the things that we have learned is that while there have been some increases at two-year institutions, our four-year institutions are mostly holding steady. So the bachelor's degree numbers have increased. We estimated from between 2003 and 2014, 2004 and 2013, from 141,000 to about 180,000, which is about 27%. That basically tracks increases in enrollment, but doesn't really account for the gap. One of the things that's also distinct about California is we, unlike some of the states on the East Coast where about half of their degrees come from publicly funded institutions and the other half come from a number of private institutions, California is much more heavily reliant on its public institutions. About 72% of all degrees that are conferred in this state really come from the public institutions. So when we build in that lag, it has a significant impact. We also found that in sub-baccalaureates in particular, when you looked at what happened during the recession and during the peak of the recession, a number of the private for-profits were able to come in and where students maybe didn't have as much access at our public institutions, they ended up going to private for-profits. And certainly what we know, and there was 70% growth in a single year in 2011, 70%. And so what we know about that is that when you look back even just at last year and the unfortunate incidents with Corinthian, that we have a number of students who were not better off as a result of attending some of those institutions. The other thing I would like to say just about thinking about the gap is the gap has some differential effects if you want to think about it in the context of equity. By that I mean that there's a disproportionate impact on Black and Latino students in this state in terms of the degree attainment gap. What we know is that in 2013, approximately 6% of the population in California was Black, approximately 36% was Latino. And when you looked at completion rates at UC, only 3% of African Americans were graduating from UC. Only 17% were graduating from, of Latinos were graduating from UC. CSU does better. Their student population is a different mix, but certainly for African Americans at 4%, it's not a huge uptick. It's better with CSU, but again, there's a significant gap between that population. And our two-year institutions are also struggling in terms of not having a degree attainment that matches the overall makeup of the population. The other significant inequity that we try to understand in our report is not just around the demographics, but what does it mean in terms of course of study? And what we found is there's not there's not equity in terms of where students are actually majoring. Blacks are the least likely to major in engineering in this state. Latinos are the least likely to major in computer science in this state. Those are degrees that we all know are getting a lot of play, certainly near where I live in the Bay Area. And it's also significant because what we found, generally speaking, is that computer science didn't even rank in the top 10 in some instances in the top 10 degrees. And I think that trend might be coming from the fact that there are lots of other providers who are able to come in and kind of do more short-term strikes and give people just enough to get into the labor market. So really needing to think about what it is our higher education institutions are able to offer so that students are able to take advantages of those opportunities at our publicly funded institutions. We also found that sub-baccalaureate degrees, quite a number of Black and Latinos are much more likely to major in the protective services, and many of those degrees and credentials, if you will, are being provided by the for-profit institutions. There was some question as we did our analysis about the extent to which those institutions that the extent to which those majors were in oversupply, so that students were completing and then not able to find employment because there were more students being produced with those degrees than there were actually jobs. And obviously with some of the for-profits, it's a significant lift in terms of the actual tuition that they need to support their studies. We are focused, a lot of people have asked me in the course of spending time in Sacramento, why do you care about this degree achievement gap? And we're focused on the degree achievement gap for two reasons. One is, I think when you think about having a degree achievement gap, it's really important to have a number so that it provides a broader framework for our state in order to think about what it is that we want from our higher education institutions. We obviously are lacking in any kind of broader coordinating body, as Hans mentioned, and so it really takes some sustained attention to really kind of provide some direction for the state. And I also think it's imperative that we ensure that the results of economic growth in this state are evenly distributed. And what we know right now is that economic prosperity cannot exist in California unless we have a broad understanding of economic prosperity, which means it needs to include much more equally all parts of our population. On our final slide, we have some policy ideas. I also see these as a complement to the fine work that Hans has done. And in some ways, what we were trying to do with our policy concepts, as I call them, is figure out some of the how. If we need to increase success, how might we do that? If we need to improve enrollments and access, how might we do that? And how might we do it in a short period of time? One thing that we've been looking at is the possibility of trying to do some more systematic degree audits so that we have a number of people in the state who have some college but have not completed. I think 1/3 of blacks in this state have some college without a degree. And if we were able to figure out ways to get some of the folks who have some college back into school to complete those degrees, that would help to close that degree achievement gap. Similarly, you might recall that last year when Governor Brown had his Innovation Prize, there was one college, Hartnell College and CSU Monterey Bay, who won for an innovative prize around trying to model a 3-year computer science and information technology degree. There may be other courses of study, other curricula out there that could be modeled for 3-year degrees. And so we were interested in that as a potential model. That particular campus and that particular program was interesting because 90% of the folks who were in that program were Latino. And I think that speaks to the desire to get at the equity agenda as we are also thinking about the broader economic returns for students and for the state. We have been very strong proponents for years about the idea that we need some kind of state coordinating entity, that there needs to be some mechanism to make sense of what the needs of the state are, in terms of the number of degrees and credentials and how that relates to regional labor markets. Hans and I can go on the road for days and tell you about the need for data in the state, that we are looking for some entity that can really provide us with comparable and reliable data across the segments. Having a P20 data system in the state would be kind of probably the ultimate, but I think that we do need, as we think about how to move the needle, some mechanism to understand over time how well we're doing. And finally, what Hans said about full-time enrollment and thinking about moving from 12 credits to 15 credits, I think is an essential part so that not every student can get there, but a number of students could. And we're going to start to try and figure out what that would look like for the state of California in our future work. Thank you.
Thank you. We can now open it up to comments or questions from this panel. Ms. Baker?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the very clear presentation. I have a couple of questions. You've cited some statistics on how there's particular inequity in the gap within African American and Latino communities. That's very helpful for us to have. I'm also curious if you have any statistics on those who are working families. They have children, they're trying to support their families while also going to school. Is that information that you have looked at? Because that's one of the challenges to completing the degree, is doing so while also supporting a family and having young children. Do you have any data on that?
I don't have any data on that. The data that we looked at really looked at individuals, and so I don't know, is there data on that?
We haven't actually looked at that per se. In this context, we have looked at it when we've been looking at some of the programs of the community colleges, and they certainly do serve a very large number. I don't know off the top of my head, and we have community college people here, maybe they could tell you, but certainly that's a much larger component of the community college population than it is UC and CSU. UC really, in its undergraduate programs, does serve the pretty traditional recent high school graduate. Mm-hmm. CSU has more of a mix, and we also have some CSU officials here, so they might be able to tell you. And I do know also that CSU, when they initially developed their online degree program, they were targeting initially, and I don't know what the update is on it now, but they were targeting just the type of people that Londe had mentioned, people who had gone to CSU but not completed, adults, probably working family members, to get them to be able to come back in a way that was convenient for them, which would be online, to finish their degree.
Well, that's helpful. It's helpful data for us to study, because as we're looking at particularly the ability to go from 12 units to 15 units, who's most challenged by that, and what can we do to help? And is there just some that is just simply not going to be possible? But that is going to be very helpful information, and with some of the other folks joining us today, we can work on that. There's this second issue, and I just like your comment on what you can do about it, because there's quite a bit of dialogue out there right now really questioning whether a 4-year degree is worth doing. In families that see the amount of debt that they will have after 4 years. You know, I represent an East Bay district. There's a lot of folks who work in Silicon Valley, and they say, I don't need a 4-year degree to go and be successful. Or there's also terrific opportunities in our trades, in our trade industry, that offer apprenticeships and great career opportunities that don't involve, again, the amount of debt, but a potential lifelong career. Can you just address that that's part of it as well? And there may not be much that can be done from what data you've looked at on that dialogue, but it's an increasing point that I'm hearing from constituents, and I think we're seeing it across the state. Trust me, I'm pushing my kids to get a 4-year degree, so I'm going to make that clear. But it is part of the conversation that's out there now.